The film which you are about to see is an account of the tragedy which befell an amateur cave explorer in Kentucky. Originally from Oak Forest, Illinois, 27-year-old William J. Coughlin was your typical avid outdoorsman who normally takes part in lots of hiking and camping. Well, that was until one of his friends introduced William to the insane sport of amateur spelunking. The first cave that they discovered was just a small local structure without too many corridors, making it the perfect beginner's cave to explore. Though being the adventurers that he and his friends were, they all decided that they were going to need more of a challenging system to test their abilities. And so after a few weeks of searching, finally on May 28, 1993, their quest brought them to a spelunker tourist attraction known as Cave City. Located in west central Kentucky, this small town is also home to the infamous Mammoth Cave National Park, which also has multiple cave systems, one of which is considered the world's longest cave system, which stretches an incredible 420 miles of surveyed passageways and corridors, and is also the site of one of America's most infamous cave rescues and deaths of the 20th century, the Floyd Collins tragedy. And so on the 28th of May, William and two of his friends, Kevin Feeley and James Jakala, all made the almost 6-hour trip south to Kentucky and never looked back. And as soon as they arrived to the park, they checked into their hotel and immediately went to the tourist center in town to see which cave they wanted to tackle first. And after a few minutes of deliberation, they all decided that a smaller system known as Buzzard Roost Cave would be the best fit to conquer first. The cave itself has two different tours that are offered, one that's named the Wild Tour and the other the Historic Tour. The Historic one provides a guided tour through safe and mapped out passageways that's more for beginners. And while the Wild Tour is also a guided one, this tour goes through more of the unmapped areas and corridors that are more known for its claustrophobic inducing tight passageways, but also for its less maintained areas as well. And so after a few more moments of conferring with each other, they all decided on taking the historic tour first, mainly because it was the next tour to explore the cave and our friends were eager to get started. And so after the group was forced to sign a release form, William and James would decide to stay on the tour that they had just signed up for, while Kevin decided to stay in the visitor center and would perhaps wait to join a tour later when he felt more up to it. Meanwhile, after William and James completed the historic tour, the park already had the wild tour getting ready to go. And with their adrenaline still pumped, William and James opted to join this tour as well. And so after having to fill out another release form, the two joined a group of 4 other spelunkers and a tour guide, who then made sure to inform the group exactly of what lay ahead and how difficult it actually was going to be. And with that, the guide handed everyone an extra handheld flashlight, told them to stay close, and headed off. As the group were starting to navigate their way through the tight and winding passageways, our two friends, William and James, would be having the time of their lives, as they were finally having a once-in-a-lifetime experience by conquering their first advanced cave system. Then, as the group made their way past the midway mark, the guide would also make sure to take this time to inform the group that they were now going to start their descent down to the more difficult parts of the system that were considered more claustrophobic inducing, as well as how they were going to be coming up on a 30-foot rope ladder that was held in place by thin wooden beams, as well as a second ladder that's about 20 feet that's a little further down the system, and made sure to let them know of the dangers that now truly lie ahead of them. As the group started their second descent, William would start to notice that every so often he would become stuck on some surrounding rocks, though luckily it was nothing ever too terror-inducing, as he was always able to pull himself free after only a few seconds of actually being stuck. Then once the group was able to finally descend down the second ladder and the group made it down to the bottom, the tour guide then told the group that they were free to explore but to stay close. That way nothing bad happened to them, as he used his satellite phone to make a quick call back to his colleagues up top. Unfortunately though, once the guide's back was turned, our friends would decide to make the worst decision of their entire lives. Their plan was going to be to sneak back up to the second ladder and try to explore a dark passageway that William had seen earlier. And so, thinking that they would only be gone for a few minutes or so, the two set off. As the two made it back to the ladder, William would be the first to try to climb back up. Though as he would begin to try, the combination of his weight and weakness of the rope itself would make William's descent back to the first rope a rather difficult one, to say the least. And unfortunately, no one in the group were really prepared either, as no one brought any helmets, water, food, or specialized climbing gear to help them back up. And so as William was continuing to struggle up the rope ladder, he would begin to sway back and forth, eventually causing him to lose his grip and fall about 10 feet or so. And unfortunately, as this happened, he would hit his head on multiple rocks on the way down, and then again as he hit the hard cave floor. Then once he was able to snap out of his disbelief, James called out to William and ran by his side in order to try to stop the bleeding from his head wound. Then as blood started to pool around William's head, James couldn't help but to just stare in unbelievable awe as he just witnessed the entire thing. Then as James began to care for William's head wound, he began to ask him questions as William was still conscious. Though as James asked more and more questions, he would quickly learn that William had most likely suffered from a concussion, as he was no longer coherent or making sense as well. As well as he also noticed that William's eyes weren't really responding to the light that was being periodically flashed. Though after a few minutes would pass by, William would once again regain his motor skills and shortly after would begin to panic as he slowly realized his situation that he now found himself in. Then, as James tried his best to comfort his friend, the tour guide and 4 other spelunkers would finally make their way towards the ladders and see the severity of what just happened. And immediately thinking of the difficult climb back up that they were already going to have before this accident, the tour guide then took control and informed everyone in the group that they would all have to work together as a team if they had any chance of successfully exiting the cave. Though knowing that his friend was at least 6 foot tall and 200 pounds and still going in and out of consciousness, James would argue that they should at least try to use the satellite phone and try to call for outside help. But then the tour guide tried to argue that he didn't believe that William would last that long due to his perfusive bleeding, and that if he had any chance of survival, that they needed to act now. Though in all honesty, James really believed that he didn't really want to make the call because the tour guide didn't want to cause a fuss back up top. But not knowing what else to do, he agreed and the group got ready. Then working as a team, they were able to get William slowly but surely not only back up the second rope ladder, but also the first one as well, making it all the way back up to the midway point. Then celebrating, the group was excited and thinking that they were past the actual difficult part in their ascent back up to the top. And unfortunately, they all failed to remember the insanely tight and winding corridors that they now had to somehow squeeze William's large frame through. Though William was now coherent enough to at least slowly crawl on his own through the passageways. As he was crawling his way through, the group made sure to keep one person in front and behind him at all times just in case. And miraculously, he was able to crawl a lot better than they thought as he navigated his way back up. Well, at least that was until William found himself as a passageway that would have him crawling at a downward angle. And as he crawled his way through, the group would eventually hear their teammate that was directly behind William call out for help. As unfortunately for William, he had become lodged between the cave wall and several sharp and jagged rocks that were now protruding on the opposite wall. And to make things worse, he was stuck upside down and was beginning to feel the unforgiving force of gravity pushing him further down, which unfortunately for William, was only lodging him further into a trapped position. And to further exacerbate the situation, William would also begin to bleed profusely from the wound on his head. There was also not much William could do to help himself get free, because horrifically, as William got stuck, he managed to pin both his arms in place, one behind his back and the other under his stomach. Then the group tried pulling and simultaneously pushing his body through, which horribly only lodged his body further, making a bad situation even worse. Then as James would begin pushing William's legs with all his might, he would end up pushing William further into what was already a very tight passageway, which unfortunately then made his breathing near impossible, which then plunged him into a complete claustrophobic nightmare. Then finally, with no other option available, it would be at this time that the tour guide would finally give in and call his supervisor back up top, so that way they could save William before it was too late. The supervisor then, as fast as possible, called the local police station, who then immediately sent out a quick response rescue team. Then as the team made its way towards William, they began to work diligently, though in all reality, things were not looking so optimistic as William's blood was all rushing towards his head, causing his vision to start to blur, and his state of consciousness to become incredibly confused, until eventually William lost all consciousness, which horrifically is an almost guaranteed death sentence in a situation like this, as William was no longer able to help, all while his body continued to become uncontrollably cold as his blood continued to pool towards his head. Then, knowing that the chance of an actual rescue had all but slipped through their fingers, the rescue team called down for some blankets in order to keep him warmer as time went on in this cold, dank cave. And by this time, most of the group, except for James, had been escorted out through a secondary passageway. James had made the conscious decision to stay with his friend until the rescue team had told James that he had no other choice but to leave. Then finally, as a last resort, the rescue team decided they would strap William up to a pulley system and try to yank him out this way. As they hooked him up and began pulling on him, William would then begin to involuntarily groan and make gurgling noises as his body was beginning to get stretched and contorted. Not to mention the insanely sharp rocks that were lodged between his chest and stomach were also starting to rip at his skin underneath. Then tragically, almost 23 hours after initially entering the cave and 17 hours after the rescue team had initially arrived, William, at the young age of 27, passed away. and eventually had to wait on an additional 3 days before his body could properly be retrieved. And as his body was brought to the morgue, it was determined that his death was caused by compressive and positional asphyxia, which essentially meant he was upside down and in a narrow passageway. He eventually lost the ability to breathe properly on his own. Investigators also later came to their own conclusion that the owner of the park was liable, and that the release that the boys had signed earlier did not specify the exact dangers that they could have gotten themselves into, which ultimately resulted in Williams' family suing the park and winning an undisclosed amount in restitution. And with that being said, may William J. Coughlin rest in peace. And once again, thank you for watching. Remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons and turn on the notification bell for more content in the future. Goodbye for now.